Welcome to the ILC Daily Show. My name is Martin Murphy.
And I'm Sophie Fisher.
So welcome back to the ILC Daily Show. It's day 8 of the International Labour Conference. We're slowly approaching the end of the ILC. However, we still have some way to go, though we have plenty of information and news to bring you. This morning was the 6th of the thematic forum, so we looked at the issue of multilateralism and an equitable future. And this afternoon at about 3 o'clock Geneva time, we'll be bringing you live the 7th of the thematic forums. This one is going to talk about business and the decent work. In this show, we're going to be looking more in detail into each one of these two topics, and we're going to have a number of live interviews, including one with Mr. Just Corti, who's the Director General of the EU Department of Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. But before we start with the show, let's take a look at the news so far today. Sophie?
Thank you, Martin. Thank you. Okay, as Martin said, this morning's thematic forum looked at multilateralism for an equitable future. In particular, how we can tackle growing inequality. The high-level panel included the Director General of the World Trade Organization, Roberto Cavallo de Azevedo, Sharon Barrow, who is General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation, and the ILO's Director General, Guy Ryder. Now, if you missed the forum and you want to catch up on it, you can find it on the ILO's website. Just follow the links to the ILC and to the live events. This afternoon's thematic forum is on business for decent work. Those taking part will include Jacques van der Broek, who is CEO of the recruitment company Randstad, Laurence Fres, Executive Vice President of Nestlé, and Richard Sammans, who is Managing Director of the World Economic Forum. Once again, if you can't attend and you want to see what's going on, check out the ILO's website. Martin.
Yes, so, and as every day, we're going to be doing live interviews, like we said, on the issue of business for decent work and also on the issue of multilateralism for an equitable future. If you want to start sending in your questions, we're live both on Facebook and Twitter, so you can send in your questions right now. The hashtag to use is behind us. It's ILO 100 in English or OIT 100 in French and Spanish. Now, like we've been doing throughout this week and the past week, we want to bring you some of the interviews that we've done with the panelists of the other thematic forums. For this too, we're going to be talking to, we talked to Carlos Lopez, who's the honorary professor at University of Cape Town and member of the ILO Global Commission on the Future of Work. And the second one is with Professor Andres Ortega Klein, who's a senior research fellow at Royal Elcano Institute. Let's take a look.
We had a very interesting session this morning. Is technology helping achieve decent work across the globe? What was your main message to the forum here in the ILO?
My main message is that it is possible. We have potential to use technology the right way. It has the potential to create jobs. It has the potential to increase social time. It has the potential for social cohesion. It has the potential to reduce inequality. But it depends on how we put in place the right incentives, the right policies, the right regulations. And this is not a given. Some countries will be able to do it. Others will not because anybody is against technology, but because you need some strategic insight to be able to do it. And obviously sometimes you depend also in international developments, because now we have become all globalized in terms of the value chains. There is a huge concentration of intellectual property, so therefore it is necessary for regulation to go beyond your borders. It has to be a global effort.
I was listening to your position there, and you said we should not talk about destruction but disruption. What does that mean?
Well, basically, the way normally economists like to describe what is happening right now is creative destruction, because jobs are being destructed, is true. But I think it's minimal. Most of the jobs are being transformed rather, and there is a lot of introduction on machine learning, automation, artificial intelligence that is creating incredible disruptions in the way we organize work, in the way we organize production, and in the way we measure productivity. So I'm more in favor of talking about disruption, creative disruption, rather than creative destruction.
You also mentioned that the future of work has already started in Africa. Leapfrogging, maybe. You gave very interesting examples. What's happening with technology in Africa?
Because most people tend to think that where the innovation is taking place is the only place that is going to be leading in terms of technological developments. What I'm trying to demonstrate with examples is that you have the innovation dimension, but what makes innovation really productive is when you have a larger number of people using it. And some of the users are actually where the consumers are. If you have in Africa a big increase on population, middle class, urbanization, obviously you have to count them as users. And the demonstrations I was giving basically confirmed that fact, that in many areas like mobile banking, Africa is leading because it's about also the use of technology, not just the creation of technology.
Well, thank you very much for this interview. Carlos Lopez is a professor in the University of Cape Town, and he was also a commissioner in the Global Commission on the Future of Work that the ILO called. The report was out in January and is about how to build the future we want. Thank you.
Bueno, yo creo que lo principal es que estamos en una transición y que esa transición tiene aspectos positivos y aspectos negativos y que hay que, por lo tanto, empujar los positivos, donde hay muchos ejemplos, por ejemplo, en África, con la digitalización de África, la entrada de la banca móvil en África y otros ejemplos, y hay otros negativos, como pueden ser la creación de plataformas y de sistemas de trabajo que no respetan nada y que hay que de alguna manera regular, ¿no? De lo que se trata es de ver cómo esta transición se reduce el coste y se gestiona el coste y se avanza hacia una sociedad mucho más inclusiva, tecnológicamente hablando, y mucho más centrada en la persona humana, en lo que se llama human-centric, ¿no? Bueno, yo creo que un nivel de consenso es que hace falta cooperar entre empresas, entre diversos actores, ¿no? Desde los gobiernos, las empresas, las administraciones locales, incluso las ciudades y otras cosas, porque eso es la manera de avanzar y lograr acuerdos que valgan en todo el mundo. El segundo mensaje quizá es que la tecnología tiene muchas posibilidades, pero veremos qué pasa. Y el tercero puede ser el que tenemos que avanzar hacia una sociedad mucho más que esté mucho más basada sobre la tecnología, la justicia tecnológica, que vale no solo dentro de los países, sino también entre países, ¿no? Bueno, esto se basa en la idea de que, por ejemplo, en los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible hay un apartado sobre, o un objetivo sobre innovación y tecnología, y hay otro objetivo sobre inclusión. Y estos objetivos no están conectados, entonces se trata de ver cómo se conectan y cómo no se quedan atrás ni sectores de las sociedades ni países enteros, porque uno de los riesgos que hay con las nuevas tecnologías y la vuelta de algunas industrias a los países industrializados, no digo industrias y no digo empleos, porque muchas veces los que vuelven son máquinas que las reemplazan, pues crea un riesgo de desindustrialización prematura para algunas economías que estaban ya lanzadas en esa vía y que tenían muchas esperanzas puestas en eso.
Welcome back to the ILC Daily Show. Those were two of the panelists that took part in the panel in the thematic discussion on Monday, which was on technology and the future of work. Now we're going to talk about the theme of this morning's panel discussion, which focused on multilateralism and how to shape a decent future of work for all. With us is Mr. Jos Corta, the Director General for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion from the European Commission. Sir, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. This morning's thematic panel, as we said, focused on multilateralism for an equitable future of work. How do you see the role of multilateralism in helping to shape a future of work that's decent for all?
Well, I think it's very hard to see any sort of solution to any issue in the world without a multilateral approach. And of course it is clear that the European Union is and has always been a very strong supporter of multilateralism. So we seek solutions to the issues that bother people, that bother our societies by working together. First and foremost within the European Union and with its member states, but also on a global scale. And I think there is the conference today and all these 2 weeks, in fact the ILO conference shows how important multilateralism is, and we will keep defending it. We see also a lot of possibilities to improve the multilateralism and the role of the ILO, in particular by linking it up more strongly to other organizations, such as the World Trade Organization, but also the international financial institutions. I think there is important work being done there, and we hope it will be concluded this week as part also of the Centenary Declaration. So multilateralism is, I think, the solution to many of the problems that bother our citizens.
And for our viewers who are following us both on the ILO website, on Twitter and Facebook, some of them who are not in Europe, they might not know what the European Commission is. Could you briefly explain what the European Commission is, and in particular how it helps, how it works with countries to promote sustainable development?
The European Union is a complex organization, so I find it only normal that people are sometimes a bit puzzled. But I think we are, the European Commission is one of the institutions of the European Union. The European Union has 28 member states, and it's composed of 3 major institutions: the Council, which is the member states' representatives, the Commission, which is an independent body that is making proposals and executing also much of the decisions. That's why we are very often referred to as the executive, a bit like the Labour Office, I think, here, the office. And then thirdly, the Parliament, European Parliament. But it's a complex organization. Our contribution beyond Europe itself, I think, is in pursuing an active external policy. I think the European Union is particularly strong when it comes to trade and to also sustainable development cooperation. And we try to, in a way, combine these different strands, the classical foreign policy with trade, with what we do for the Sustainable Development Goals, development aid. We are the biggest European Union, and together with its member states are the biggest donor worldwide. And I think what we try to do, and which is quite successful, is linking up these different strands and come to sort of a coherent external policy. We call it external policy in our jargon, not foreign policy. It's all a bit special. And I see it as my task, as being responsible for employment and labor more broadly, to also ensure, in particular, the ratification of the core labor conventions of the ILO. To make that a bit more understandable maybe for the viewers, is that if the European Union concludes or negotiates a free trade agreement, as we're doing with many countries, there's always a part in there that also would oblige the country with whom we are negotiating to comply with the core labor standard of the ILO, plus also the Paris Agreement on climate change and a number of other really core international texts that are, in a way, I would say, the bedrock of multilateralism. So it is actually impossible to conclude a trade agreement with the European Union unless you ratify and implement the core ILO labor conventions. It's not always easy, and we have our issues, but it shows, I think, in practice that these things do actually matter, and in the end I think we're quite successful.
There's been a lot of talk this week at the conference about some of the mega trends affecting the world of work, like climate change, demography, migration, these kind of things. You said that social issues are very much at the heart of the EU. What would be interesting to know is how these issues are affecting you in terms of trying to implement these social rights.
Yes, so I think it's fair to say that within the 28 member states we are basically having the same issues as other parts of the world, which means globalization, digitalization, automation of work, broadly what we call the future of work. The population is shrinking, clearly, not everywhere in the same dimension. I think you always have to be careful. There are 28 member states and they tend to be quite different. But globally I think we're like the big other blocks of the world. And what we're trying to do is to find solutions at the level of the European Union. So we also have a very ambitious program on future of work, which consists of a number of elements. I think the most important one is legislation. So the European Union does actually adopt legislation that is directly applicable in all the member states, which is mainly geared towards setting a minimum standard. So the minimum level of protection for workers or self-employed, below which member states or social partners cannot go. In fact, under the commission that is now about to end, which is being led by Jean-Claude Juncker, we've made, in fact, enormous progress, particularly when it comes to legislation. A number of very important regulations and directives have been adopted last week, so that is important. Then secondly, I think we also are very active, try to be as active as possible in the social dialogue. So there is a social dialogue at the level of the EU, whereby the representatives at the EU level meet, and we try to really stimulate. We also fund a lot of their activities because I think we believe that social dialogue is very often the best way to proceed. Thirdly, money. We're in charge of a budget of about 100 billion euros for 7 years, which is spent by the member states, but also in a way that should help them in finding solutions. And finally, more broadly in terms of coordination of policies of the member states, we have quite an elaborate annual program, which in our jargon is called the European semester, in which we make an inventory of each and every member state and we compare them. There's a scoreboard, and we can actually see which member states is doing well, for instance on activation of women in particular. The employment rate of women is monitored, but also the employment rate of young people and youth unemployment. And in particular, I think also the disadvantaged groups. We have in Europe still, for instance, the Roma population, which is not actively participating enough. And so we try to encourage member states with our instruments to help. And I think at the end of the day, I'm actually quite positive about all this, because I think we can see that we are the human capital. People are becoming more and more relevant and more scarce as well. So incentivizing everybody into work, into a job, and in particular those that are not working and those that are left behind is, I think, the central objective of our policy.
Talking about people, here's a question that comes from Twitter, one of our viewers.
Yes.
It's from Catarina Silveira. She says, inequality is damaging society, nothing new there. There is an SDG to address it. Okay, so what should be done at the international and multilateral system level to reduce inequalities? This is one of the key things that was discussed this morning, actually.
Yes. No, I think it's fair to say that inequality is indeed still it's a plague, and it's also still there in the European Union, though less and less. I think if we look at the data and we look at the Gini coefficients, or we look at all kinds of other indicators, the situation is actually improving, but we're not there yet. So inside the EU we have an elaborate program to make sure that we call it nobody should be left behind. And that's why in the title of my department there is employment, social policies and inclusion. And I think the inclusion part is quite prominent, and we deploy a lot of activities to help the member states there, some of which I already mentioned before. I think at the global level, of course, the picture is more dramatic, I say. Although there also, I think it's fair to say that millions of people have been lifted out of poverty, I think mainly in China, but also in Africa. The record is not so bad as people tend to believe, but again, a lot of work is to be done. And we're trying to help. I mean, don't want to sit here claiming that the European Union can solve all the problems of the world, but I think we have signed up to the Sustainable Development Goals. We take all this very seriously through funding programs, projects. I think also through our trade policy, which gets in my view, very often a bad press, even though we are by far the biggest importer from Africa, for instance. European markets tend to be much more open than people believe. But of course there are standards that need to be complied, some of which I mentioned. But if member states or if countries outside the European Union are prepared to sign up to our principles and core beliefs, the market is open to them.
So how do you use your commitment to inclusion and your development cooperation work? How do you use the development cooperation to support your aims on inclusion?
Yeah, so in development cooperation we have, again, I mean, it starts with a lot of money, which is managed by my colleagues who are in another department, and specifically in the area of employment and social and inclusion, we also support a number of projects. I could mention the vision. I have the file here. In the fishing sector, we have a number of projects that we support to stimulate decent working conditions for fishermen, particularly in Asia. Very active in Thailand and also in Taiwan. And then there's the Vision Zero Fund, which I could also mention, which is dealing with, it's a program to help our partners to develop good standards for occupational health and safety, so a safe workplace. Many casualties still occur in workplaces, and I think it's also being picked up in the Centenary Declaration, which we're very happy about, that the occupational health and safety should be promoted. So it's a fundamental right of all workers to be in a safe environment, and we're trying to help, for instance, through this Vision Zero Fund.
Mr. Porta, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. Justo Porta, the Director General for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion, very important,
indeed,
of the European Commission. Sophie, I believe we're going to watch a video related to something that Mr. Porta was referring to.
Yeah, we're going to take a closer look now at some of the work that the European Union funds, development cooperation work. One of the projects they have is called the Safe and Fair Project, and it aims to strengthen women migrant workers' rights in the ASEAN region of Asia. It's part of the EU-UN Spotlight initiative to eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls.
It's time to talk about labour migration that is safe and fair for women in the ASEAN region. We know that around 50% of migrant workers in ASEAN are women, and their numbers are rising. Women migrant workers transform societies and economies through their labour and contributions in countries of destination, and also at home. However, when migration is not safe and not fair, women migrants experience violence, trafficking, and labour exploitation. This is especially true for women domestic workers and irregular migrants. But there is a solution. The Spotlight Initiative is a new UN-EU partnership shining a light on violence against women migrant workers in ASEAN countries and against women and girls globally. Spotlight's Safe and Fair program is implemented in partnership with the ILO and UN Women by working with governments and workers, employers, civil society and community-based organisations to strengthen laws and improve access to information and services, to prevent violence and exploitation, and to realise the rights and opportunities of women migrant workers. The time is now for safe and fair labour migration for all women in the ASEAN region.
The ILO project in Asia. to strengthen women, migrant workers' rights in the ASEAN region. Now, we want to take you back to April 11th. That was the day that we had the global tour, when we had 24 events back-to-back across 24 different locations. We began in Suva and we finished in Lima. For the past days, we've been bringing you 2 events per day, highlights of those 2 events. And today we want to show you a brief part of what happened in Abidjan in Côte d'Ivoire to celebrate the global tour.
Mesdames et messieurs, accueillons ici, avec un tonnerre d'applaudissements, le groupe Magic System.
Qu'est-ce que j'ai fait au bon Dieu?
Et nous sommes heureux de les retrouver
à
Salfo et les magiciens.
Il faut grouiller dans la vie, ça va aller. Oh. Travailler, il faut travailler. Oh.
Travailler, il faut travailler pour réussir.
Travailler, travailler, il faut travailler.
Travailler,
Bon, DJ.
il faut travailler pour réussir.
Merci beaucoup, DJ. Merci beaucoup. Bonsoir à tout le monde. Bonsoir à tous les travailleurs. Et puis bonsoir au monde entier parce que je sais que nous sommes suivis partout dans le monde.
Yes, sir.
Et c'est une ambiance à l'ivoirienne que vous voyez là, vous qui nous regardez de partout. Et dire aussi que Magic System vient de la Côte d'Ivoire. Alors je voudrais, avant de faire cette prestation, adresser un message solennel à tous les travailleurs du monde entier et ceux de la Côte d'Ivoire en particulier. Le travail, c'est un outil indispensable pour l'émancipation et pour l'épanouissement de toute personne. Mais je vais profiter aussi pour passer un message très fort. Parce que le combat de Magic System cette année, c'est la parité du genre, partout, que ce soit dans le travail, partout, dans l'éducation, dans la scolarisation, partout, il faut la parité du genre. Et je profite de l'occasion, pendant que nous avons le ministre de l'Emploi et de la Sécurité sociale, nous avons le ministre Kofi Studer, qui est président du patronat, et nous avons aussi le directeur régional adjoint du BIT qui est là. Vous êtes des porte-parole, vous êtes des porte-voix de ces travailleurs-là. La sécurité sociale d'un travailleur, c'est important, mais la parité du genre, c'est aussi très important. Autant de femmes, autant d'hommes. C'est important, c'est le monde entier, et la Côte d'Ivoire ne doit pas rester en reste. C'est ce message que je voulais passer avant de commencer ma prestation. Voilà. Alors, le titre qui va suivre, vous le connaissez tous. Hein, c'est vrai que je défends les femmes aujourd'hui, mais les femmes m'ont fait du tort dans le passé. Voilà. Donc, je vais chanter ça pour vous ce soir. C'est un titre que tout le monde connaît. Tous les pays qui nous suivent connaissent ce titre et on va le chanter ce soir. On y va, DJ.
Yes, sir.
C'est dans ma galère que la gomme tout m'a quitté. C'est dans ma galère que la gomme tout m'a quitté. Avec un peu, matin, midi, soir, on était ensemble à la rue Princesse, au milieu maquillot, à salle faut payer le poulet. Quand l'argent est fini, un tout a changé de côté. Ouaribana, elle a changé de copain. Dieu merci pour moi, je savais chanter un peu. J'ai fait ma cassette, on me voit à la télé. Matin, midi, soir, c'est moi qui chante à la radio. Quand tout a dit ça, tu le cas où a percé. Attends, je vais partir le couper. On dit premier KO n'est pas KO. Deuxième KO qui est Nyatao. On dit premier KO n'est pas KO. C'est deuxième KO qui est Nyatao. Dimanche matin et coco, on frappe à ma porte. À ma grande surprise, c'est la go en tout, je vois. À sa place, j'ai dit, il y a longtemps, on s'est plus revu. Elle veut me mentir, elle dit chérie, j'avais voyagé. Je suis de retour. Je t'appartiens, prends-moi cadeau, fais ce que tu veux. On dit premier KO n'est pas KO. Deuxième KO qui est Nyatao. J'ai dit chérie Coco, qu'est-ce que tu veux manger? Ça même hésité, elle me dit poulet braisé. Tant on me dit premier KO n'est pas KO. C'est deuxième KO qui est Nyatao. Tu veux manger, poulet est trop petit, ça fait pas de rassasier, c'est quand il m'a pressé, je vais te donner, et de nous d'éléphant, tu vas manger, elle est fâchée, elle s'en va à la maison, si elle va à la maison, population va me tuer, je vais demander pardon. Elle est quittée dans poulet, s'en va dans le loco. Je dis si c'est à loco, c'est pas compliqué. C'est plantation de bananes, tu vas crier. au lieu des fourchettes, oh, ça peut pas bien piquer, oh. C'est avec l'atto, tu vas manger, oh. On dit premier gaou n'est pas gaou, oh. C'est deuxième gaou qui est nyatao. On dit premier gaou n'est pas gaou, oh. C'est deuxième gaou qui est nyatao. Merci beaucoup. On est content d'être là. Voilà. C'est ça. Bon, ça, par contre, cette chanson, je sais que vous ne la connaissez pas. Feel the magic in the air. Tout le monde s'est levé, tout le monde s'est levé. On est à Abidjan, là. On est à Abidjan, là. On est à Abidjan. On va toutes les mains en l'air comme ça. Toutes les mains en l'air. Tout le monde. Feel the magic in the air. Comme d'habitude on est calé, oh, eh, oh. Comme toujours ça va aller, on te met en grâce à gogo, oh, eh, oh. Tous ensemble on fait le show. On t'invite à la magie, y'a pas de raccourci. Oublie tes soucis et viens faire la folie. On t'invite à la magie, y'a pas de raccourci. Oublie tes soucis, oh, 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 oh. C'est pas seulement pour les bobos, oh, eh, nous on vient dans nos mambos. Mon ami, si tu as le niveau, oh, eh, rejoins-nous pour t'enjailler. On t'invite à la magie, y'a pas de raccourci. Oublie tes soucis et viens faire la folie. On t'invite à la magie, y'a pas de raccourci. Oublie tes soucis, oh, 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 oh. On vient du ghetto pour aller plus haut. Avec les magiciens, c'est près du coco. On vient du ghetto pour aller plus haut. Avec les magiciens, oh, oh, oh. Feel the magic in the air. Levez les mains en l'air. Feel the magic in the air. Levez les mains. Merci.
And that was a look at how they marked the global tour in Abidjan. A particularly lively session, I think, yeah?
Yeah, very nice.
Very nice, very nice. Okay, now it's time for our second of our today's look at dispatches from the ILC with our roving reporters. This time they've been catching up with some of the panellists who took part in Monday's thematic forum, which was on technology and the future of work.
100 years ago, when ILO was set up, employers, government representatives, and employees got together and they used 3 keys as a symbol, and those 3 keys turned together and the gates to the new ILO open. So today, as we face unprecedented technological change, the digital transformation that's sweeping the world, 3 new keys need to come together. And those are the keys of 1, inclusiveness, to ensure that everyone gets an opportunity to participate in the ongoing digital transformations. 2, guardrails. So alongside the common rails to ensure inclusiveness, we need guardrails to ensure that no one is left behind, that rights are protected, and that the right smart regulation is there to ensure that excessive power doesn't get concentrated in the hands of a few. And finally, we need capacity. We need human and institutional capacity to be able to seize the opportunities that the digital transformations offer. So this points to the need for lifelong learning, to affordable, accessible, and portable skilling and reskilling. So this was the main theme that ran through the discussions today. These discussions are beginning to happen. Firstly, these discussions have to be anchored in the existing rights and principles and norms that have been developed through hard-won debates and sacrifices over the years. So those values, those norms should continue to guide these social contracts. 2, there is the important role of dialogue and early dialogue. So dialogue and cooperation across different stakeholders should not be an afterthought. It should not be a consultation exercise. It should be a co-creation exercise. And that way the roles and responsibilities of the different actors become clear, and the actions they need to take to ensure that they seize the opportunities and manage the risks, they become clear. So those are the 2 essentials in developing these new social contracts. And frankly, we are beginning to see signs of this in some parts of the world. Scotland, France, Rwanda, Ghana, India, there are examples of these new conversations around new contracts for the digitalizing economy. I think it all begins by the platforms and the companies creating those work opportunities, assuming greater responsibility for what goes on those platforms, not passing on that responsibility to workers or those who are participating in creating work. So that's number 1. Number 2, there is an important role for governments. They need to create the right regulatory environment that doesn't stifle innovation, that allows these opportunities to expand, but at the same time that allows protection to be extended to workers, to partners on those platforms. And third, I think you hinted at that, we need to use technology itself for providing the solutions. So if we are using our clicks and swipes to generate data that allows these platforms to maximize the customer experience, why can't we use the same technologies to ensure that the protections are not undermined, that human rights, human dignity is upheld?
Le message principal est le fait que le changement technologique et l'innovation apportent du bien dans les conditions de travail. Ça augmente la productivité, et qui dit augmenter la productivité dit augmenter les salaires des travailleurs en travaillant dans de très bonnes conditions. Ça, c'est l'aspect positif. Mais nous devons être assez vigilants pour suivre l'évolution du changement technologique et l'innovation, de sorte que dans le futur, le changement technologique et l'innovation ne puisse pas amener plus d'inégalités, plus de précarité d'emploi et dans le cas de l'Afrique, accroître l'informalité. Nous devons nous assurer que le changement technologique et l'innovation doit se faire dans un cadre bien précis où l'humain est mis au centre, où on investit beaucoup dans le capital humain, où on assure des investissements responsables, de sorte que nous puissions créer des emplois beaucoup d'emplois, mais des emplois décents, et nous assurer que les institutions qui gèrent les relations de travail puissent être suffisamment fortes et pouvoir nous assurer ce dialogue constructif entre les travailleurs et les employeurs ainsi que les États pour pouvoir assurer le bien-être de la population, mais aussi le bien-être des travailleurs dans le futur. Si nous parlons du futur du travail, eh bien ça doit être un futur du travail où nous devons renouveler le contrat social de sorte que ça soit un futur du travail, mais un futur du travail pour le travailleur. Oui, les opportunités, il y en a parce que si nous parlons aujourd'hui de la digitalisation ou même de la robotique, ça ne peut qu'augmenter la productivité de nos entreprises. Et de là, assurer que les travailleurs ont du travail durable, donc la durabilité des emplois, mais des emplois assez décents. Ça, c'est l'opportunité. Et plus nous allons évoluer dans l'innovation et tous les changements technologiques que nous voyons à gauche et à droite, le travailleur pourra travailler dans de très bonnes conditions. Ça, c'est une opportunité. Mais le défi, c'est aussi de se dire que le fait de travailler avec surtout les algorithmes pourrait créer une sorte de rupture de relation entre le travailleur et son employeur. C'est-à-dire qu'il y aurait un intermédiaire qu'on appelle l'algorithme, qui n'est pas un humain et qui pourrait couper cette relation. Et si cette relation est coupée, vous comprendrez que le dialogue social que nous sommes en train de prôner pourrait plus créer plus de problèmes que vraiment trouver des solutions. Le deuxième défi, et bon, si je parle de l'Afrique, il faut que tous les États africains puissent investir dans les nouvelles technologies et surtout dans Internet, un Internet qui est accessible à tous, à bon prix, parce que nous pensons que demain, Internet ou la digitalisation est le futur du travail.
Welcome back. Those were two short interviews with Mr. Amandeep Singh Gill, Executive Director of the UN High-Level Panel on Digital Cooperation, and Mr. Eric Manzi, Secretary General from CESTRA in Rwanda. Now, if you remember earlier in the show, we spoke to Mr. Jost Korta, who's the the Director General for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion in the European Commission, and he was talking about some of the EU-funded projects. We brought you a video about one of those projects, and now we want to show you another video. This is about the way the ILO works, thanks to the support from the EU, on promoting the rights of workers in the Thai fishing industry and the seafood industry as well. This is called the ILO Ship to Shore Rights Project, and this is the video about it.
ก่อนนั้นมันไม่ดีหรอกแต่ว่าผ่านมาก็มันดีขึ้นเงินเดือนก็ไม่ตรงกับแบบว่าจ้างแล้วก็เวลามาถึงฝั่งบางทีก็จ่ายดีให้บางทีบางคนก็ไม่จ่ายแบบว่าจ่ายแค่200 300เพราะไงនឹងមានសេចក្តីសុខនិងសប្បាយចិត្តដែលមានថៅកែបានដល់សេរីភាពទាំងบัตร ATM ប៉ាសពតบัตรទីชมพูនិងការមើលថែឈឺស្កាត់បានល្អប្រសើរជាងមុនច្រើនណាស់
ไม่ว่าจะเป็นแรงงานไทยหรือต่างด้าวก็ตามนะคะเขาโดนนายจ้าง ค้างจ่ายค่าจ้างเจตนาค่ะหน่วงเหนี่ยวเขาที่จะให้เขาทำโดยที่เขาไม่มีอิสระภาพในการที่จะไปทำงานในที่ใหม่อย่างเงี้ยมันก็เข้าข่ายที่จะเป็นแรงงานบังคับเราไปให้คำมั่นสัญญาในเวทีนานาชาติไม่ให้มีแรงงานบังคับเกิดขึ้นในประเทศไทยถ้ามีเราจะลงโทษเป็นอัตราโทษที่สูง
It's extremely important, but let me start by really congratulating the Royal Thai government and the authorities for having done this ratification, because by ratifying Protocol 29, the Kingdom of Thailand in fact becomes the first country in Asia to have ratified it.
บทบาทของไบโปที่ตั้งมาเพื่อตรวจเรือประมงแจ้งเข้าแจ้งออกให้ปฏิบัติตามหลักเกณฑ์หรือกฎหมายที่ทางราชการกำหนด
ในส่วนของกระทรวงแรงงานเนี่ยเวลาไปตรวจนะคะเจ้าหน้าที่กรมสวัสดิการและคุ้มครองแรงจะไปดูเรื่องการคุ้มครองแล้วค่ะจะต้องมีการสอบถามซึ่งเดี๋ยวนี้มีการสัมภาษณ์เบื้องต้นที่ค่อนข้างละเอียดดูท่าทางเขาเหม่อลอยไหมเขาดูหวาดกลัวไหมเขามีแผลตามตัวไหมเข้าสุ่มเสี่ยงของแรงงานบังคับที่จะไปเป็นค้ามนุษย์ก็ให้สหวิชาชีพมาตรวจแล้วถ้าเป็นก็ส่งดำเนินคดีกับพนักงานสอบสวนต่อไปค่ะ
พนักงานตรวจแรงงานของเราจะแจ้งความต่อพนักงานสอบสวนซึ่งเราปีหนึ่งเนี่ยนะครับเราแจ้งความดำเนินคดีไปประมาณเป็น1,000 รายนะและในจำนวนนี้มันก็จะอยู่ในกระบวนการยุติธรรมเนี่ยประมาณสักครึ่งหนึ่ง
นายจ้างเนี่ยยินดีปฏิบัติแล้วก็ถือปฏิบัติมาตลอดเพราะว่าถือรักษาสิทธิของความเท่าเทียมแล้วก็การต้องได้รับสิทธิขั้นพื้นฐานที่ต้องดูแลอันนี้เป็นสิ่งที่นายจ้างปฏิเสธความรับผิดชอบไม่ได้เราจะมองเห็นว่าตอนนี้กฎหมายของประมงเนี่ยจะเริ่มคงที่เพราะว่าเขารู้แล้วก็ปรับปรุงแก้ไขในสิ่งที่มันดีขึ้นทุกเช้าเนี่ยจะมีเจ้าหน้าที่จากประมงมาเริ่มดูเขามีความเข้าใจความเป็นบริบทมากขึ้นอันนี้ต้องขอชื่นชม
จะมีกฎหมายแรงงานบังคับออกมาอย่างชัดเจนเป็นสิ่งที่ดีนะเพราะว่ามันก็ไม่ได้ขัดแย้งกับ ethical standard ของเราความจริงเราภาคเอกชนนะคะเราพร้อมปฏิบัติทุกอย่างอยู่แล้วนะคะเรามองเรื่องแรงงานเป็นเรื่องเป็น asset เป็นอะไรที่เราต้องหวงแหนและถนอมรักษาด้วย
ILO plays a continuous role throughout the process of preparing a government to ratify a convention and basically providing the conditions for a common understanding, because obviously if there is a common understanding in terms of the design of policy, it is more likely then that the policy is going to be effectively implemented. So the ILO plays a role throughout the whole process leading up to ratification and then of course crucially subsequently in terms of implementation.
Now, why is it important? You in fact benefit all players. You benefit, of course, the workers, their livelihoods, possibilities. You also brand Kingdom of Thailand as a provider of ethically, correctly produced seafood, which then again is a market asset, especially in new work like markets like Europe.
Okay, that was a look at the Ship-to-Shore Rights Project, which looks after the rights of migrant workers in the fishing sector in Thailand. And just a quick reminder that you're watching The Daily Show live from the International Labour Conference in Geneva. If you want to send us any comments or any questions, you can see the hashtag behind me, ILO100 or OIT100. Now, let's move on to this afternoon's activities. And this afternoon's thematic forum is on the role of business in promoting decent work, a very important topic. My colleague Adam Bowers has been speaking to Deborah France-Massin, who is director of the ILO's Bureau for Employers' Activities, about what employers and businesses can do.
Today's thematic discussion on business and decent work looks at the role of the private sector in shaping the future of work. I'm joined today by Deborah France-Massin, who's director of the ILO's Bureau for Employers' Activities. Hi Deborah, how are you?
Hello.
So you put a report out recently that looked at the role of employers and employers' organisations in shaping the future of work, in coming to terms with the major changes that are happening in the world of work and looking to the future. Could you tell us a little bit about what the report found?
Yes, we wanted to understand what's changing, changes in business environment, and I think we can characterise the opportunities for business and the challenges. Uncertainty, challenge, movement, change. So businesses are working in an interconnected world where markets are more and more interconnected. They're coping with the pace and frequency of digital change and technology. They're coping with demographic changes, and they're not quite sure how to deal with the skill shortages and gaps that brings. And they're also looking at issues and coping with political instability and the challenges brought about by climate change, which bring a greater risk of natural and political disasters. So key learning that we had from our report was that businesses, to stay afloat, have to innovate. But that also brings opportunity. For example, I think it was 82% of the companies that we surveyed, particularly in Africa and Asia, were saying that that's actually the pace of technological change is enabling them to tap into new markets. And so it's important that businesses actually come to grips with those changes. And I think that's going to manifest itself in a number of ways. Firstly, that companies have to seek to capture the digital and technological change. It enables them to tap into new markets, to work in a different way, to organise different way, to look at their branding in a different way, their logistics in a different way. And I think it would be wrong to just look at the opportunities that flexibility brings to businesses. It also brings enormous opportunities for workers, where the place of work is no longer the centre of the employment relationship. So with a multipolar world, with multi-opportunities and a flexible world, there will be more opportunities to have different ways of tapping into the labour force across their life cycle, and also be able to have greater opportunities.
And one of the big transformations you talked about just then was climate change.
Yes.
Climate change affects us all and affects enterprises. Now, how are enterprises going to adapt to look at that, and can enterprises truly be sustainable?
I think that's an interesting question, and I was quite surprised by when we asked the companies we surveyed what were the biggest risks that they saw facing their businesses in the future. 69% said the risk of natural disasters caused by climate change. It was also more interesting to see that younger entrepreneurs, there were 82% of them said that was going to be a bigger change. So perhaps the young are more aware of the potential impact of climate change than us older people. I think some companies are reacting by looking at new sourcing of different materials, different processes, as they strive for sustainable processes and products. But I think the change has got to go beyond that. You've got to, and companies have got to look at the whole issue of climate change as part of the triple bottom line in the way that they have a license to operate and to do business. And that's where employers' organisations, business representative organisations come in to not only advocate for different company behaviour with their company behaviours, but also to have an impact with governments around how a regulatory environment can be created and sustained that enable business to be wealth generators and job creators, but at the same time act as responsible corporate citizens.
And you mentioned young entrepreneurs in your answer there. In a way, does the transition to a green economy, to a sustainable economy, mean more opportunities for young entrepreneurs?
Yes, I think that one of the interesting things that we're facing is how particularly young entrepreneurs who are not perhaps hidebound by different processes and ways of looking at the labour market and business models are embracing perhaps this flexibility and innovation in a way that older, more established companies have not been able to do so.
And another issue, not just for the future of work, for the today of work, if you like, is the issue of gender equality. You've also just recently, Actemp, put out a report on gender equality, looking at how businesses can address the issues of gender equality. Could you give us an insight into the main findings of that report, please?
Yes, I think this is something that we've been looking at for a while now in the Bureau. We had our first report that came out in 2015 that was called Gaining Momentum, that tried to have a global snapshot of how women were rising up the corporate ladder. We've now had another snapshot in 2019, and it's clear that progress is being made, It's also interesting to know of the companies that we surveyed, over 60% said that they found that they can see a direct correlation of having more gender inclusive management structures, having an impact directly on their bottom line, on innovation, on productivity and on profit. I think that's quite interesting, but the challenge is you then have a look at, okay, does that then translate into action in companies in this respect to pursue those objectives? And whilst progress is being made, it's still interesting to note, therefore, that only about 30% of company boards worldwide have what's the critical mass of 30% women membership that's usually seen as the tipping point for achieving these gender-related outcomes, and under 15%, more than 15% of boards worldwide are still male only. So there are still some barriers out there, probably linked to a number of things. One being the glass ceiling and glass wall phenomenon, where even where women come into the workplace, they still tend to be in management functions that are in the back office, human resources, public relations, administrative management, and are finding it more difficult to break into the traditionally male-dominated roles such as strategic management, production management, all of the roles that are needed to then be able to progress into a senior management or board role, let alone a CEO role.
Were there any surprises in the report in terms of the countries you looked at and where women were actually breaking through into the board roles you talked about and the management roles you were talking about?
I think over the last 5 years we tried to track the change in terms of change. The accelerated pace of change seems to be coming on stream more in Asia. That could be linked to increased level of women coming out of universities, moving into the workplace. So that's where the pace of change has been perhaps the fastest, followed by Europe, the United States, the Caribbean, Africa, and then the Middle East. And I think that's interesting because although there are many things that companies can do to try and tackle the issue of gender equality or gender diverse policies in the workplace, it is also a societal issue. And one of the major problems is still the issue of unconscious bias in the workplace and the roles that societies have traditionally attributed to women. So company policies that have to be backed up by sound leadership engagement. This is not an HR issue, this is not a CSR issue, it's a mainstream management issue, and therefore needs company management buy-in and measurement and accountability. But those policies, once implemented and introduced and measured, can only gain results if they're accompanied by measures in society as a whole and an enabling environment from the government.
So there's a bigger picture there. It's not just the weight doesn't fall on one person's shoulders, it's across society, the changes need to happen, but also in the enterprise level.
That's true, and I think it's like many of the issues the ILO deals with, and that's why we are a convener. We bring everyone together, all the actors in the workplace. Each of our actors have their responsibility, but it's only when they're acting together within that sphere of influence that they can actually affect change.
And so here we are at the ILC, and exactly as you said, workers, employers and governments are coming together to talk about a number of issues during the 2 weeks. What for you are the key items on the agenda?
We're now at the business end of the conference, and far be it from me to try and intervene into what will be difficult negotiations. But I think beyond the agenda items, all of which are important to the business community this year, I think there's a different theme running through this conference. And I think it would be very easy for us to rest on our laurels and celebrate our 100th anniversary, laudable as that is. It shows that the ILO's values have stood the test of time. But I think the employer group and business in the ILO is looking forward to the next 100 years and seeing how the role of the private sector and the role that can play in sustainable enterprises, sustainable development, can come more to the fore in the work that we're doing in the ILO, and how that then can be harnessed in the multilateral system to lead to better outcomes.
Deborah Frans-Massin, thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam.
That was our colleague Adam Bowers speaking to Deborah Frans-Massin, who's the director of the ILO's Bureau for Employers Activity. Now, to stay on the theme of business for decent work, which is the topic of this afternoon's thematic forum, which starts in about half an hour, more or less, in room 20, and will be brought to you live through the ILO website. We want to bring you some interviews that we did with representatives from the International Organization of Employers, and we also want to show you a bit of the about the ILO's Business and Disability Network initiative.
The ILO plays a critical role in its convening power, in bringing together the social partners, in facilitating multilateral discussions. The world needs the ILO now more than ever when we look at what's happening in the global system of nationalism and introspection, that the ILO provides a critical role for bringing parties together on a global scale.
Future of work, there has been much hype about it being driven by technology, which is commendable. In other words, it promotes efficiency, it promotes effectiveness. However, this should not be at the detriment of the human factor, that is the interpersonal relationship or touch in the world of work. In other words, machines should not take over.
A mí me gustaría pensar en un mundo o en un futuro del trabajo donde todos tengamos las mismas oportunidades, tanto hombres como mujeres, donde exista una igualdad de circunstancias de empleabilidad también para los jóvenes, para la gente adulta, y sobre todo que se abra el camino para estas nuevas generaciones, pensando en estos niños y jóvenes que se están formando hoy en día, y que esa formación o esa capacitación que ellos lleguen a requerir puedan tener posibilidades de emplearse en condiciones de trabajo óptimas y justas.
Striking the excellent balance between workers and employers in the workplace through its international labor standards, principles, declarations, and policies.
This tripartite structure makes the ILO a unique forum in which the governments and social partners of its 187 member states can freely and openly debate to stimulate decent employment growth through sustainable enterprises, promote rights at work, enhance social protection, and strengthen social dialogue.
Companies gain knowledge on how to effectively include people with disabilities in their workforce, both by learning from our guidance, but also in particular learning from each other. The whole logic of the network is to facilitate exchange of information between companies.
You need to have a passion to promote disability at the workplace. And our network is a good example for business to showcase that people with disabilities have equally or better competencies. They are competent, they are capable, and they are committed.
And I think also business leaders, when they see the success stories, they realize that their inaccurate assumptions that they had previously really doesn't work. And in today's day and age, when we are looking at innovation and reimagining and simplification, I think the contribution of persons with disability in this framework is immense.
We've worked to try and promote disability.
The ILO brings together and shares multiple viewpoints on disability issues, which is very valuable for the network's members.
Dow chose a way, but I think there's many other different ways you can go in getting a more diverse culture in a company, and we want to learn from other companies as well. So that's why we collaborate with ILO to get these different perspectives and also learn from that in making things better also for our company.
The members of the ILO Global Business and Disability Network are changing attitudes and company cultures. As workplaces are becoming more diverse and more inclusive, they become more innovative, and that's bringing better business results.
Welcome back to the ILC Daily Show. As you can see, we've moved outside. This is the outside of the Palais de Nación. I don't know if you can see behind me is the lake. Well, you're probably blocked by the trees, but it's a very nice day here, and we're going to continue with the issue of multilateralism. That was the issue that was discussed at this morning's thematic forum. With us is Wolfgang Schiffer, who's a technical specialist in the ILO's multilateral department, and we want to ask him a little bit about some of the things that were said in the panel discussion this morning. But first of all, Wolfgang, I wanted to ask you something I've been thinking about when we were talking to the DG from the Employment and Social Affairs and Inclusion Department from the EU. We're talking about multilateralism, and I neglected to ask him, what is multilateralism?
That's a very interesting question. Multilateralism is many things to many people. I think it's important that we don't confound two issues. Multilateralism is a platform, is a process where different voices can be heard, where organizations come together, where they organize in various sites, hence multilateralism. It's often confused with globalization. Globalization, of course, is an economic and social process. So it's more how the organizations work together, how they organize themselves.
And talking about how the organizations work together, how is the ILO working together with other organizations of the multilateral system to advance on the issue of decent work?
Well, we have a number of ways in how we work together. First of all, I was quite encouraged by this morning's panel and also last week's discussion in the recognition of the importance of multilateralism. I mean, we heard lots of positive voices, and this morning's panel, one of the main messages was we should be more positive about multilateralism. It actually works. And for the ILO, it works in different forms at different levels, so at the global, regional and country level. At the country level, I think a main feature is that we work together with other UN organizations in UN country teams through joint projects and programs. A good example is one on youth employment in Cambodia, where we foster youth employment together with 5 other partners of the UN. At the global level, the issue is more one of policy coherence. So we work together with other organizations, both within and outside the UN. So UN organizations, but also processes like G7, G20, the OECD, towards policy coherence through joint research, through participation in meetings, developing joint policy analysis and proposals. So there it's more a matter of going through joint analysis of multilateral issues and proposing and developing solutions.
Indeed, one of the panelists this morning was Roberto Acevedo, the Director General from the WTO, from the World Trade Organization, and he mentioned that I think he's the one who said we should be praising multilateralism. And he said that, I believe, because there's a lot of criticisms about multilateralism, right? What are some of those criticisms?
Well, the criticism is, I think, on a number of levels. You could, first of all, look at the organizational level, that we're not as efficient and effective as we could be. If you look at an organigram of the United Nations, it's not something like you would design when you put it out of a clean slate. It's grown over the years, and rightly so. The challenges have multiplied. So it's a matter of efficiency and effectiveness, and hence there's a call and indeed quite an impetus for UN reform, and also the ILO is engaging proactively in UN reform. We want to be fit for purpose, fit for the challenges ahead of us, so the 2030 agenda. The other issue was raised by our Director General, Guy Ryder. He said we have to recognize that there is a perception out there that this is a cosmopolitan elite discussing matters among themselves. So it's important to communicate, to connect to the people out there and to connect to the challenges. So I think these are the two main aspects of criticism with regard to multilateral systems.
Talking about the impact that multilateralism can have, how can multilateralism make a difference in the lives of working women and men and children? You know, how can the fact that multilateralism exists mean a better life or a better working life for men and women?
Well, I think two aspects there are noteworthy. I mean, one, I mentioned the joint projects and programs. They would not come together in this form and have an impact on the life of, in that case, the example I mentioned, youth in Cambodia. And of course, we're working in quite a number of countries, over 100 countries in the world, in a variety of areas, often together with other UN partners. So that's a value in itself and an impact on the ground. And the other aspect is, I suppose, the ILO as a normative agency, together with other partners also, but particularly in the world of work on labor, we are a standard-setting agency. It's one of the functions of the International Labour Conference that we're at today. And so that provides a framework, a reference framework for the improvements of life of men and women on the ground by implementation of the standards set out in these labour conventions.
Absolutely, and indeed, you mentioned international labor standards. The ILO approved the last international labor standard was Convention 189 on domestic workers to promote the rights of domestic workers. Thanks to this convention, domestic workers enjoy the same rights as any other worker, and that's something that was not the case before the convention was adopted. And right now the ILO is discussing the possible adoption on a convention on violence and harassment at work. So international labor standards definitely at the core of the work that we do and that we're doing here in the ILC. Wolfgang, let's talk a little bit about these Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. As we know, in 2015, the international community adopted 17 goals to promote sustainable development. This was a result of the work of multilateralism, right? And there's a specific SDG number 8, that talks about growth and decent work, the promotion of decent work. How much have we advanced since 2015 in this goal?
Well, thanks for the question. It's a good question that I'm asked quite often working on SDGs. I mean, two things, I think. First, to set the context, SDG 8 is indeed on decent work, but also on sustainable, inclusive and sustained growth. So there's two aspects to SDG 8 in the first place. So it also calls in that respect for partnerships. The ILO cannot progress alone. We need partnerships in the multilateral system, but we also need action from member states to implement SDG 8. Our reports show that unfortunately the picture is problematic. If we continue on the current trajectory, SDG 8 will not be achieved by 2030. That's in fact the case for most SDGs, as was also mentioned in the panel this morning. So what needs to be done? I mean, what is required is not new policy approach. We know the solutions. We have the policy packages. The ILO has the standards. We have the decent work agenda. We know what needs to be done. What is lacking is the political commitment and also the resource allocation, both from governments but also from the private sector, to accelerate and scale up the actions to make more progress towards SDG 8.
Yeah. And the next question that we have is coming from social media, because we're live not only on the ILO website but on Twitter and Facebook, and in a way addresses the issue that you just touched on. You said that at the current rate we want to achieve SDG 8 by 2030. The question relates specifically to Africa, and it says that at the current rate most, if not all, the SDGs will not be met in Africa. What can we do about it?
Well, as I mentioned, we need to scale up what we know provides progress towards these challenges and towards the SDGs. And it's not a matter of the approaches as such. In Africa in particular, of course, we have a specific challenge around youth employment, youth unemployment, around business creation, small and medium enterprises. And the ILO has a policy package in that respect and has partnered with other agencies in the global initiative for decent jobs for youth. It's that kind of partnerships, I guess, that also need to provide for more advances in regions like Africa, but not Africa alone.
Youth employment is certainly one of the key topics that the ILO is working on. The other one is gender equality, and I know that the SDGs mention this issue in particular. Can you tell us a little bit about what does the SDG say about gender equality, and in particular what the ILO is doing to help promote this issue?
Well, it's SDG 5 on gender equality, and it has a number of dimensions, like most SDGs. Most pertinent, of course, for the ILO are two of those. One is the wage gap, which unfortunately is still huge, on average around 15-16% if you look at it, and that certainly needs to be addressed with suitable national policies, and the ILO is providing policy advice there. And we have again, a global partnership, the EPIC partnership on Equal Pay International Coalition, together with the OECD and UN Women. So that's the global level action that we're taking. It also looks, of course, at issues of discrimination more widely, and that's very pertinent that we should discuss this today, because the ILC here is putting together a convention on discrimination and sexual harassment. So again, this is what needs to happen, setting international labor standards, but also providing technical solutions on the ground.
Wolfgang, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. We're going to head back to the studio now. See you later, Wolfgang. Alyosha, if you can follow me or try to follow me. We're going to walk back inside. And here you can see there are some people taking a short break from the ILC. We're walking inside back to the studio. And you'll see a little bit about the backstage, in a way, of the ILC. This is quite a busy area. It's full of delegates, and they're waiting for the next forum to start, which starts in a few minutes' time. It'll focus on business for decent work. Here, if you remember, if you were with us on Monday, here some people are taking a picture. This is the communication stand. We have the engagement area here right in front of me. On my left, we have the virtual reality booth. We have the screen, and you'll see that I'm walking slowly back to the studio. I'm going to try to go in underneath. Oh, Karen's going to open it for me. Thank you very much, Karen. And Sophie's right there waiting for me. So now, if you remember, one of the things that Wolfgang was talking about, he mentioned decent work quite a bit in his interview on... Hello again, Sophie.
Welcome back, Martin.
So in the interview, Wolfgang was talking about the SDGs, and he was talking about the decent work agenda as well. So what we wanted to do is bring you a nice video that we have that shows in brief what we mean by this concept of decent work.
Between decent work and the SDGs. Now, let's move on to look at another part of the work of the International Labour Conference, because one of the main committees at every ILC is the Committee on the Application of Standards. Our correspondent, Judith Carreras, spoke to Jean-Jacques Elmiger, President of the International Labour Conference and also former Chairman of the Application of Standards Committee, to find out a little bit more about its work.
Nous sommes avec l'ambassadeur Jean-Jacques Elmiger, qui est le président de la conférence internationale du travail de cette année, l'année du centenaire. Il a présidé aussi plusieurs commissions de l'OIT, notamment la commission de l'application de normes. Et hier, dans le deuxième forum, justement sur la thématique, sur la liberté syndicale et reconnaissance effective du droit de négociation collective, il était un des participants et nous avons quelques questions à vous faire. D'abord, la première, pouvez-vous nous expliquer qu'est-ce que c'est le système de contrôle de normes de l'OIT? Qu'est-ce que c'est? Pourquoi c'est important? Et aussi, pourquoi quelque chose d'unique au niveau international?
Oui, écoutez, volontiers, merci pour ces questions. Je crois que ce qui fait la spécificité du système de contrôle des normes de l'OIT, c'est que c'est un contrôle politique et c'est un contrôle tripartite, où tous les acteurs de l'OIT sont impliqués, les gouvernements, les travailleurs, les employeurs, quand la discussion se passe à la conférence, mais aussi tous les organes de contrôle qui font le travail avant, afin de pouvoir permettre les discussions constructives à la conférence. Et ce que je veux dire, c'est que ce système de contrôle touche en priorité les États qui ont ratifié des normes, d'une manière générale, et le but, c'est de trouver des solutions avec les États, avec le soutien des partenaires sociaux, pour essayer de promouvoir la meilleure application et le meilleur respect des normes internationales du travail. Concernant les principes de liberté syndicale et de négociation collective, je tiens à spécifier qu'il s'agit là de principes qui sont dans la constitution de l'OIT elle-même et que une grande partie du système de contrôle tient aussi sa légitimité de la constitution de l'OIT. Donc on a véritablement un ancrage constitutionnel centenaire qui a gardé toute sa pertinence, qui s'est adapté au gré du temps. Mais ce qui est très important, c'est de promouvoir les normes et de permettre aux pays de travailler dans un esprit constructif avec les partenaires sociaux.
Merci beaucoup. Pouvez-vous partager avec nous les principaux messages que vous avez soulevés hier dans les forums?
Oui, volontiers. Écoutez, moi, ce que je trouve très important, c'est justement en relation avec ce que je viens de dire. On a des principes qui sont inscrits dans la Constitution, qui sont inscrits dans l'histoire. Mais il faut les faire vivre. Il faut faire vivre ces principes. Et c'est par le travail tripartite, par le travail des organes de contrôle, qu'on arrive à traduire ces principes dans la vie de tous les jours pour l'ensemble des travailleuses et des travailleurs. Je tiens à spécifier aussi pour l'ensemble des employeurs et des responsables d'entreprise, parce que la liberté syndicale, c'est pas seulement pour les syndicats, c'est aussi des garanties envers les employeurs et les associations d'employeurs. Donc il y a une parfaite égalité de traitement. Et je trouve que c'est quelque chose d'extrêmement important. Et c'est véritablement le message que l'OIT doit délivrer, c'est la proximité avec le monde du travail, avec les acteurs du monde du travail, au niveau de la place de travail. C'est pour moi quelque chose d'absolument déterminant. Alors voilà ce qui me semble très important. Et ce qui est important pour moi, pour les organes de contrôle, c'est que ces organes de contrôle doivent aussi réfléchir à développer leurs pratiques, leurs méthodes de travail, si nécessaire, pour permettre de s'adapter au monde du travail de demain. Les nouvelles technologies génèrent de nouvelles formes d'emploi, mais il faut trouver des solutions pour que ce qui est garanti par la Constitution en matière de liberté syndicale et de négociation collective notamment, se traduise aussi dans le développement d'une pratique en faveur des travailleuses et des travailleurs, et voire des employeurs aussi, pour ce qui touche les développements liés aux nouvelles technologies.
C'est l'année du centenaire aussi, c'est un moment spécial pour faire de bilan. Dans ces cas-là, quel est votre bilan du rôle du système de contrôle et de surveillance du BIT?
Écoutez, c'est un bilan, il faut le reconnaître, il est positif. C'est une histoire non-stop de soucis et de faire valoir la justice sociale. Et je pars du principe, et je pense que c'est quelque chose qui doit rester, c'est qu'il n'y a pas de justice sociale sans partenariat social et il n'y a pas de partenariat social sans association de travailleurs et association d'employeurs fortes et représentatives. Et c'est ça qui est véritablement la clé du message de l'exercice, du contrôle des normes. Et je pense qu'il faut continuer dans ce sens-là.
Et vous disiez tout à l'heure aussi les changements qui a lieu dans les marchés du travail et dans la société avec l'avenir du futur du travail. Selon vous, quels sont les défis, mais aussi les opportunités pour le travail de la conférence dans les périodes à venir?
Oui, tout à fait. Mais je crois qu'on est en train de montrer la bonne direction ici maintenant. On est en train de réfléchir à élaborer une déclaration du centenaire qui doit véritablement donner aussi plus de force et de détermination à l'OIT pour poursuivre sa mission exemplaire. Et je crois que là, on a véritablement un rôle historique à jouer. On ne peut pas simplement regarder en arrière et dire tout était bien. On doit se mettre le défi de se dire qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire mieux encore pour le futur. Ce que je veux peut-être ajouter aussi, c'est que j'ai eu le plaisir et l'occasion de présider plusieurs fois la commission de l'application des normes. C'était dans les fin des années 80, au cours des années 90, où le monde a beaucoup changé. Et on a aussi beaucoup interrogé la légitimité de l'OIT vis-à-vis justement de ses garanties fondamentales, liberté syndicale et négociation collective. Et je crois que ce qui est important, c'est que l'OIT a su réagir très vite et que par la déclaration de 1998, réaffirmant les principes et les droits fondamentaux au travail, on a pu élever à un niveau supérieur un certain nombre de normes internationales du travail et de droits fondamentaux au travail. Et ça, c'est l'œuvre à perpétuer, notamment en matière de négociation collective et de liberté syndicale.
Merci beaucoup, je vous remercie.
Merci à vous et bonne chance aux organes de contrôle. Merci.
That was Judith Carreras talking to Jean-Jacques Elmiger. Many of you may recognise Mr. Elmiger because, of course, he is president of this year's Centenary International Labour Conference. You'll have watched him on the webcast, or if you'll have been in the plenary hall, you'll have seen him on the podium. Now, sitting behind him, there are a number of other officials of the conference, less familiar faces, but all essential to the smooth running of the operation. So, who are they and what actually are their roles? Our colleague Alex Belapovsky has been behind the scenes to find out.
Right before the conference, the Clark's team organizes a briefing for the president and his vice presidents to make sure that they meet each other ahead of the conference. They decide on how they are going to rotate and to sit on the podium running the discussions.
So here we are in the office of the list of speakers. And what we try to do here is to come up with a list that's balanced from both a tripartite and geographical point of view. Today we have a particularly challenging situation because there's a possibility that we have to overhaul the list. There is an important change, and this is something that we cope with on an everyday basis and try to finalize that list early enough to be able to publish it in the daily bulletin.
And during the conference I'm detached to the Clark's team, and my role is to basically provide the script, procedural script of what's happening in the plenary. So opening, adoption of reports, closing, high-level sessions, all of that stuff. We provide our officers with notes for that, so that's me.
Comme vous le savez, le président de la conférence est cette année Monsieur Edmiger, donc de la Confédération suisse, et je rédige les mêmes notes que Denise en français.
I'm assistant to the president of the International Labour Conference, in particular in charge of his agenda, and the difficulty is it changing every 30 minutes all the time, and we have to keep it updated. And my role is to follow the president everywhere, to show him where he has to be and what he has to do.
In the plenary, especially this year, which is the centenary year, and we have a lot of speakers, more than usual, is to make sure we have 3 speakers sitting on the front row at every given time, so that when they are called upon to deliver their speech, to go up to the lectern, they are already ready and seated at the front row. Is we keep eye contact and liaise with the podium with the clerk. So when we have a problem that there is one of the speakers who is not present or is late to arrive in the room, we do alert the clerk so she could then alert the president.
Comme président de la conférence internationale du travail du centenaire, je suis très impressionné d'abord d'exercer cette fonction. Et je suis très reconnaissant aussi aux États membres de m'avoir nommé à cette fonction.
Assisting the president of the conference gives a unique opportunity and it's a very rewarding experience. What impresses me most is how relevant, how important, how appreciated the ILO is by the constituents.
Welcome back to the ILC Daily Show. We're in a different part of the building. This is the Pas Perdu. It's a beautiful hallway on the A building. So before we're on the, I guess, on the left side. Now we're on the right side of the Palais des Nations. The video that you were just watching, it's a backstage of what happens inside the plenary room, which it's actually behind me. But now we want to talk to you about a very special project that the ILO has this year, which is the global campaign to take the ILO to the people. And with me is Kieran Mera-Kerpelman, the head of our advocacy unit and someone who's been very, very involved in the global campaign. Welcome, Kieran. How are you?
Thank you, Martin. I'm very well.
Thank you for taking the time from you're in the promotional area of the ILC communication stand. I wanted to ask you, first of all, what is this global campaign, Take the ILO to the People?
Well, Martin, this was a vision of the ILO for the 100 years, for the centenary, that we wanted to take the messages of the mandate of the ILO far and wide. The ILO is known, and yet it's not always very clear what it is that it can do to change the lives of people. So this was a vision where many departments got together and we put together these messages, and they are in several languages. And we have not just the ILO at headquarters, but we have all the different offices around the world that are going with this. And not just that, it's the tripartite nature of the organization. We have constituents working with us, we have public-private partnerships, we have the governments and workers and employers, everybody taking these and using them throughout this year to take the ILO to the people.
Exactly. So we have a series of posters that show the work of the ILO and show the impact that the ILO has in the world of work, how the ILO makes a difference in the lives of working women and men. And maybe we can walk around a little bit, because here at the Palais des Nations in the Pas Perdu, we've put up some of these posters. Kieran, come with me.
You can actually see some of the uses around the world of how these messages are being used. Yeah.
So here, this is the airport in Geneva. That's a bus in Geneva. I think on the other side we have Cairo, Thailand. So, but let's take a look at some of the posters, because we have 25 posters that we've put in 3 languages, and we've set them up here at the Pas Perdu. There is the ILO DG. Hello, DG. Good luck. And we've put them up here. This one is on. Can you read some of the messages, please, Kieran?
Sure. And as you can see, that we have the messages in different languages, but every time at least 3. So, l'accès aux soins de santé n'est pas un privilège, c'est un droit fondamental. And access to healthcare is not a privilege, it is a human right. And el acceso a la atención sanitaria no es un privilegio, es un derecho humano. So we hope that by taking these messages, as I said, this is for healthcare, these have been translated all over the world into many, many languages. And that is really helping to take these messages to all corners of the globe.
Yeah, so the purpose is to show how the work of the ILO, how international labor standards are behind many of the issues that affect the world of work. And if people want to know more about the global campaign, or if they want to know more about the issues, in this case healthcare, they can go on the ILO.org/100 site, and that's a site where we have a lot of information. We have a multimedia site showing not only the history of the ILO, but also the impact that the ILO has had throughout this 100 years, and looking into the future on this many issues.
And Martin, what is interesting here for people is that we always have the photograph showing you a sort of a negative aspect, and the drawing, which is the future, is what it could be. And so if we go around, look at some of them, that's something to keep in mind.
Exactly. So this one it says, el mundo del trabajo está cambiando, lo mismo debe suceder con nuestras habilidades. The world of work is rapidly changing, so should our skills. So this is the, and it's in French too, le monde du travail change vite, nos compétences doivent évoluer au même rythme. So this is on skills.
Yeah, so here you can see that here is somebody who is not a very skilled person perhaps, but his future is bright. And we should, through the ILO, help people in getting from here to there.
Okay, let's take maybe a quick look at some of the others, because we're getting close to the end of the show and the next thematic forum is beginning. Let's take a look at this one. This is one that we've used quite a bit. Yeah.
Yes, this is on forced labor, and something that's very close to the heart of the ILO right now with the 50 for Freedom campaign that we have. And not tricked and trapped, but paid and protected. Everybody has to have decent work, and we need to give everybody a chance to earn a decent living.
Yes. So this, in fact, is the way we're linking two campaigns, the global campaign with the 50 for Freedom campaign. Absolutely. To ratify the forced labor protocol. And perhaps I'm looking at Karen, we have time for, we have a few more minutes. Here, this is
the conditions of work. So work arrangements may change, but they always have to be decent. And we also have the one next to it, which is really important, is about there are no equal rights without equal opportunities. And that's really important in the world today.
And something important to highlight, Kieran, you were mentioning before that these posters are up not only here at the Palais des Nations, they're up around Geneva and buses at the airport and in trains also, and some of the offices around the world are doing the same thing. But perhaps it's a way of inviting our constituents, if they want to join this campaign, if they want to print these posters and promote these messages, what should they do?
Well, first of all, they can be directly in touch with the ILO offices in their own countries. That's the first point. And if not, they can also be in touch with the Department of Communication. They could go to the ilo.org/100 site. And we also have all these available for them to download, and they can use them in any way they want. We also have animations that they can use digitally, and those have been very popular because you don't print them and you can use a lot of them. So I think that that's one way to do it, and we would be very happy, and we would welcome the fact that you can get these from us and take them to your people.
Yes, because these are posters that are not only available for print, they're also available for social media. We have some animated versions for social media. Yeah, so I think we're going to wrap it up here because they're getting ready for the event that's taking place this afternoon. We have our hosts, the Swiss, are holding a reception this afternoon outside in the Coeur d'Honneur. So, Kieran, I want to thank you very much for your hard work and for this global campaign, which I think it's been very successful.
Thank you, Martin. But I think this was a teamwork, and the vision came from the organization, and the Department of Communication took it forward.
Yeah. So thank you very much. I'll let you go back to the communication stand.
Thank you.
Thank you. And to all of you, thank you for watching another edition of The Daily Show. In a few minutes, the plenary on my left will begin, as well as the 7th thematic forum, which will focus on business for decent work. And tomorrow we'll be back with The Daily Show. Tomorrow we go back to the high-level visits. We have 6 heads of state and government who are coming to the ILO. I apologize for the noise. They're cleaning the terrace. But I'll leave you now with a beautiful, beautiful view of the Lake Geneva and also the Jet d'Eau. Goodbye and have a good day.